My nephew was diagnosed with leukemia, and my daughter was the only one in the family who could save him. To save the only male heir, the only one to carry on their precious family name, my in-laws forced my frail daughter to donate her bone marrow. In the end, my brother-in-law's son lived. My daughter died on the operating table. Lost in a haze of grief, I clutched her cold, lifeless body and threw myself from the 18th floor. When I opened my eyes again, I was back. 3 days before my nephew's diagnosis was even known. In my first life, when my nephew, Ted, was diagnosed with leukemia, my daughter, Amy, was the only match. But Amy had been sickly since birth. The doctors explicitly advised against the donation. To protect the family's golden boy, they all insisted. They drugged me, knocked me unconscious, and dragged my little girl to the operating room. When I came to, the whole family was celebrating. Ted's transplant was a success. And my Amy was lying in the room next door, her small body still and cold. My father and mother-in-law looked at me with faces full of false sympathy. "Don't blame us, Lily," my mother-in-law had said, her voice cloying. "If it had been Amy with leukemia, we would have made Ted donate for her, of course. She just wasn't strong enough to survive," my father-in-law added with a sigh. "It was her fate. She was just unlucky." I was drowning in a sea of rage and despair, screaming for justice for my daughter. But they all pointed their fingers at me, calling me hysterical, irrational. Even my husband, Mark, stood by silently, his face a mask of indifference. Utterly broken, I carried Amy's body to the highest floor and leaped. I never expected to open my eyes again. But here I am, 3 days before it all began. "Mommy, why are you crying?" A small voice pulled me back to reality. Was it because I kicked off the blankets last night? "Are you mad at me?" I turned, my vision blurred with tears. My daughter, Amy, fresh from her nap, was looking up at me with wide, worried eyes. She was only 7, but her gaze held a wisdom that broke my heart. A fresh wave of grief and love washed over me. I pulled her into a fierce embrace, burying my face in her soft hair. "This time, Mommy won't let anyone hurt you. I swear it." I packed a bag, and the first thing I did was drive Amy to my mother's house. Later that afternoon, when I knew Mark would be off work, I called him. "Mark," I began, my voice thick with feigned anguish. "I took Amy for a checkup today. The doctor said she has leukemia." I let a sob escape my lips. "Last time, you all said you'd make Ted donate if Amy were the sick one, didn't you? Let's see how you react to the news now." After hanging up, I drove home alone. When I walked in, my in-laws were fawning over Ted, the picture of domestic bliss. My arrival shattered the cozy atmosphere. The smiles vanished from their faces, replaced by annoyance. Before I could even step fully inside, my mother-in-law rushed forward. "Mark already told us about Amy," she said, her tone sharp and devoid of any sympathy. "We heard that even if you treat this disease, she'll be on medication for life. So, we've discussed it, and we've decided it's better not to treat it." Besides, my father-in-law chimed in, not even looking at me. "You know our financial situation. We just enrolled Ted in that expensive advanced STEM camp. There's simply no extra money for Amy's medical bills. If you insist on treating her," my mother-in-law finished, "you'll have to get the money from your own family." One by one, they all nodded in agreement, sighing about Amy's terrible luck, her unfortunate fate. Their callousness didn't surprise me. I kept up my act, my voice trembling with a desperate plea. "Mom, Dad, my family will cover the costs. But the doctor said she needs a bone marrow transplant. The success rate is highest with a close relative." I came back to ask if he could just get tested to see if he's a match. The air in the living room went still. "Are you trying to ruin your nephew?" My father-in-law slammed his hand on the table, his voice a low growl. "Ted is our precious grandson. I will not allow anyone or anything to harm him." "That's right," my mother-in-law shrieked, as if I'd suggested feeding her grandson to snakes. She threw a dish on the floor, where it shattered. "Ted is your nephew. How can you be so heartless?" The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. When their grandson gets sick, they're willing to sacrifice their granddaughter. But when their granddaughter is the one dying, they won't even spare a dime. I let my shoulders slump in pretend defeat. "But Mom, Dad, Amy is your granddaughter too. Can you really just stand by and watch her die?" Seeing my agitation, Mark pulled me aside. "They're right, Lily," he whispered, refusing to meet my eyes. "It's not her fault she's sick. If she doesn't make it, we can always have another kid. Maybe a boy next time. Even though I thought I was prepared for anything, hearing those words from her own father felt like a physical blow. Fine, I said, my voice flat and cold. I understand. You won't save her. So I will. I turned and walked out, leaving them all standing there in stunned silence. What they didn't know was that my phone had been in my pocket the entire time, its microphone recording every last venomous word. The next morning, I was woken by a flood of notifications on my phone. My father-in-law had pinned a message in every single family group chat. Effective immediately, Lily and Amy are no longer part of this family. Their lives and their deaths have nothing to do with us. This notice is final. Every group had 99 plus new messages. I opened one and saw the conversation. He'd written, Amy has leukemia. It's bad enough she's going to die, but now her mother is trying to guilt-trip her cousin into donating his bone marrow. Immediately, a few relatives jumped in to my defense. Donating marrow isn't that big a deal, is it? You can't just let Amy die. I don't think Lily is trying to guilt-trip anyone. She's just a mother trying to save her child. Poor Amy. To get such a terrible disease at her age, what awful luck. Seeing the conversation shift towards sympathy for Amy, my father-in-law quickly typed again. I'm just warning everyone. Donating marrow is risky. It can permanently damage your health. He followed up with, if she comes asking any of you for a donation, it's on you. We have nothing to do with it. The relatives who had just been expressing their sympathy went silent. No one wanted that kind of risk falling on their own family. I looked at the chat log and smiled. It was like they were handing me the ammunition themselves. I was just wondering how to expose their ugliness to the world, and here they were doing the work for me. I typed a quick reply into the group. But Amy is part of this family, isn't she?
Dad, Mom.
I can understand if you don't want to help, but why are you stopping others from helping? It's like you want her to die. A moment later, my sister-in-law, Ted's mother, replied. It's human nature to avoid risk. Everyone has their own family and career to think about. An injury could be a disaster for a household. If it were my Ted who had leukemia, I would rather give up on treatment than burden the rest of the family. True family doesn't burden each other. The chat was flooded with praise for her, calling her noble and selfless. I had to laugh at her grandstanding. I wondered if she'd feel so selfless tomorrow when she received her own son's diagnosis. Ignoring the barrage of insults that followed, I closed the app and saved the entire chat history. Back in the Harrisons' living room, my father-in-law decided that simply kicking me out wasn't enough. Mark, you should divorce her, he said, his face grim. A disease like that is a money pit. We can't let one girl drag the entire family down into poverty. My mother-in-law quickly agreed. A divorce would be for the best. All these years, and she couldn't even give you a son. Just one sickly, worthless girl who's now dying of a terminal illness. You'll be dragged down if you stay with a woman like that, she insisted. Once you're free, Mom will find you a much better wife. Mark just nodded. You're right. We can't let one girl ruin our whole family. We have to get a divorce. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a text from him. If you insist on trying to save Amy, then we're done. Let's get a divorce. Meet me at the courthouse tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'll give up my parental rights. From now on, Amy is your problem, not mine. A wave of relief washed over me. I hadn't expected them to move so quickly. Amy, my love, I whispered to the empty room. No one can ever hurt you again. I calmed my racing heart and replied with a single word. Okay, The next day, at 10 in the morning, I was standing in front of the courthouse. The entire Harrison clan was already there, waiting. They stood in a tight, defensive cluster, as if they were afraid I'd change my mind and cling to them. My father-in-law shoved a divorce agreement into my hands. Don't think we're being cruel, he said, his face a mask of solemn duty. No one in their right mind would choose to save her. It's leukemia. If you won't give up, then you can't be part of this family. His righteous act was so absurd, I almost laughed out loud. Always so fake. But it didn't matter anymore. The terms of the agreement were harsh. Not only was Mark giving up all custody of Amy, but they were also demanding she be stripped of the Harrison name. They wanted us cut off, erased from their lives forever. As I read, Mark leaned in close, his voice a low hiss. If you give up on Amy now, if you promise to give us a son, I'm willing to give you one last chance to change your mind. I resisted the urge to slap him again. Without a moment's hesitation, I uncapped the pen and signed my name. A few minutes later, Mark and I walked out of the courthouse with our divorce certificate. The Harrisons huddled together, their faces beaming with relief, celebrating as if they'd just won the lottery. We're finally free of that jinx. Yes. And that sickly Amy is gone, too. I was afraid to even let Ted get near her. What if he caught it? A sick kid, and a girl at that. What was the point of treating her anyway? They were all breathing a collective sigh of relief, savoring their freedom. But in the next second, a text message alert chimed on my former in-laws' phones. I knew what it was. Ted's diagnosis had arrived. I opened it, heart steady this time, my fear replaced by something sharper, something that burned with cold precision. Acute leukemia. Immediate treatment required. The words were clinical, but they carried the weight of judgment. The Harrison family, so eager to cast Amy aside, were about to witness the consequences of their cruelty. I looked down at Amy, asleep on the couch, her small chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. In that moment, a dangerous calm settled over me. My daughter's life was fragile, yes, but fragile lives could ignite fires in the right hands. And I held those hands. I pulled the recording from my pocket, the digital proof of my in-laws' hypocrisy and malice. Their voices, dripping with cruelty and entitlement, had been immortalized in a single file. A gift I hadn't had the first time. I leaned back, letting a smile curve at the corners of my lips. They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. Tomorrow, the war would begin. This time, it wouldn't be a desperate scramble to protect a child. This time, it would be a calculated dismantling of everyone who had wronged us. Survival was no longer enough. Justice, retribution, and punishment would have the final word. The first call was to an old family lawyer I'd once dismissed as overly cautious. Now, his caution would serve me well. I played the recording, letting the harsh words of my father-in-law and mother-in-law hang in the air between us. "You understand what this is, don't you?" I asked, my voice soft but laced with steel. Yes, he stammered, his professional composure cracking. This could expose them financially, legally, and socially. Good, I said, because that's exactly what I intend. Next, I contacted a pediatric hematologist I trusted. My tone was pleading, exhausted but calculated. Every word was meant to convince him of Amy's dire need while planting the seed that her treatment would be sabotaged if the family found out the truth. Then, I began reaching out to acquaintances who had long chafed under the Harrisons' perfectionist rule, former business partners, distant relatives, and old friends who knew the family's darkest secrets. Each conversation was a careful nudge, a hint that there was more to the Harrisons than met the eye. I was no longer the powerless mother begging for mercy. I was a strategist, an avenger armed with proof, timing, and opportunity. Every ally I contacted, every line of influence I tested, was a move in a game only I knew the rules to. Sitting in the quiet of my apartment, Amy playing with her toys at my feet, I let myself feel the thrill of control. This second chance at life wasn't just about survival. It was about punishment. And I was ready to show the Harrisons what happens when cruelty meets calculation. Tomorrow, the first domino would fall. By the second week after Amy's diagnosis, I had already begun mapping the Harrison family like pieces on a chessboard. Every smile, every gesture, every whispered conversation revealed cracks I could exploit. Mark, once a source of mild irritation, revealed himself to be the easiest target. His arrogance was matched only by his vanity. The man had built his career on being seen as a devoted husband and father, yet in private he was petty, careless, and desperate for approval. I started subtly leaking hints to mutual acquaintances about his neglect, small, believable pieces of truth carefully framed to sow doubt about his competence and character. My mother-in-law was more complicated. Ruthless, yes, but obsessed with her image. She had spent decades cultivating the perfect facade, and a single blemish could unravel everything she had built. I began collecting evidence, financial inconsistencies, careless brags at charity events, unguarded messages to friends, anything that could later expose the rot beneath her elegance. And my father-in-law? The tyrant of the family, untouchable in their eyes. But even he had weaknesses. Old debts he thought were long buried, deals made in secret that could ruin him if exposed. I tracked every lead meticulously, noting which acquaintances could be nudged to stir trouble without leaving me exposed. The key was subtlety. I couldn't afford recklessness. The Harrisons thrived on appearances, and I had to turn that obsession against them. Rumors planted here, whispered there, hints of betrayal, insinuations of incompetence, small seeds that would take root and bloom into chaos. By the end of the week, my list of weak points was complete. Mark's fragile ego and thirst for validation. Mother-in-law's obsession with image and exposure of financial secrets. Father-in-law's hidden debts and questionable business deals. Ted, the golden boy, a pawn, oblivious to the cracks around him. I watched them interact on social media, at family events, even in casual phone calls. Every slip, every defensiveness, every fleeting look of irritation confirmed my assessments. I poured myself a cup of coffee and smiled as I glanced at Amy building a tower of blocks on the floor. In this second life, I was no longer pleading, no longer powerless. I was a strategist planning moves 3-4 steps ahead. The Harrisons didn't know it yet, but the game had begun, and the first pieces were already falling into place. The invitation to the charity gala arrived just days after I had begun planting seeds within the Harrison family's social circle. An event designed to showcase the Harrisons as paragons of virtue, a perfect opportunity to expose the rot beneath the surface. I arrived wearing a calm, controlled smile, carrying Amy with me. Every step was deliberate, every glance measured. The family didn't know I would be there, and that gave me the perfect advantage. From across the room, my father-in-law greeted the other guests with his usual commanding presence, unaware that I had already captured whispers of his financial shortcuts, hidden debts, and unfulfilled promises. Mother-in-law floated beside him, her elegance a mask for the panic I could almost taste. I allowed the conversation to drift naturally toward Ted, the golden boy whose health was now the center of everyone's attention. With a practiced tremor in my voice, I spoke to a small group of attendees. My daughter's doctor said Ted could use a close relative for his treatment. I murmured, voice laden with concern. I've been trying to coordinate a safe procedure, if the family would simply cooperate. The gasps around me were deliciously orchestrated. Socialites who once fawned over the Harrisons began murmuring among themselves, questioning the family's priorities. One of the attending journalists, ever eager for a story, approached and asked, "You mean the family is refusing to help Ted?" I gave a gentle nod, eyes fixed on my daughter as she played quietly. It seems so. Amy's life could have saved him if they truly value their family. The words hit like a scalpel. The murmurs spread, creeping through social media almost instantly. My secret recordings of the parents' cruelty had already been subtly leaked, framed as concern from an insider, worried about the children. Now, their hypocrisy was in the public eye, an empire built on perfection starting to crumble. Inside, the Harrisons floundered. My father-in-law's composure wavered when someone asked pointedly about the donations he claimed were for the children's well-being. Mother-in-law clutched her pearls, her face a mask that didn't hide the fear in her eyes. They realized, too late, that the same family they had tried to dismiss as weak and inconvenient had orchestrated a public reckoning. Meanwhile, I remained serene, a picture of composure and concern, guiding Amy through the event like a devoted mother. Every whispered accusation, every social media post, every curious gaze worked in my favor. The Harrison facade, the one they had spent decades constructing, was cracking before the world, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. As the night ended and I returned home with Amy asleep on my shoulder, I allowed myself a quiet smile. The first dominoes had fallen. And this was only the beginning. The first cracks had already begun to show, whispers spreading through the social circles and business networks the Harrisons had long controlled. But the true collapse would start where their empire was strongest, the patriarch himself. I had spent weeks quietly gathering evidence, financial mismanagement, shady deals, hidden debts that even the family thought buried. The kind of information that, if exposed at the right time, would destroy credibility and control. And tonight I made my move. I sent an anonymous tip to a prominent financial journalist, including bank statements, boardroom correspondence, and proof of a series of ill-fated investments my father-in-law had attempted to hide. I watched from a distance as the story exploded. Headlines appeared online almost immediately. Harrison Holdings on the brink, hidden debts and mismanagement exposed. From tycoon to tyrant, how one family's empire ignored ethics and oversight. The patriarch's composure shattered within hours. Board members called emergency meetings, investors pulled funds, and once loyal partners began quietly distancing themselves. His voice, always commanding and untouchable, now trembled in private calls. At home, my mother-in-law tried to mask panic with feigned elegance, but the truth had seeped through the cracks. The empire they had built on intimidation and cruelty was unraveling, and no amount of social charm could patch it. Even Mark, once indifferent, now a silent observer, couldn't hide the unease in his gaze as he watched his father flounder. I sat with Amy at our small kitchen table, reviewing the emails and media reports. She was building a tower of blocks, blissfully unaware of the havoc her grandmother and grandfather had wrought upon themselves. I let myself feel a quiet satisfaction. This was not random vengeance. This was precision, every move calculated, every step anticipated. Later, I received a call from one of the board members, his voice shaky. Who sent this? Who knows? I smiled softly, my finger hovering over the phone. Let's just say someone who believes in fairness, I murmured, letting the threat linger without giving myself away. By morning, the patriarch was a man forced to plead, to justify, to scramble for control he no longer possessed. The empire that had once loomed over everyone, including me and Amy, was crumbling, and the first domino had fallen. The Harrisons had underestimated me. They had assumed cruelty and power were shields against consequence. They were wrong. My mother-in-law had always thrived on control, on appearances. Every social gathering, every charity event, every whispered conversation was a carefully curated performance. But appearances are fragile things, and I had the perfect wrecking ball. It started with a series of carefully timed leaks. Anonymous emails to her social and business circles detailed her manipulations, favoritism in the company, nepotism that had forced out competent employees, and personal schemes to secure wealth and influence for her children at the expense of others. I included screenshots of her messages, bank transactions, and a few carefully edited recordings of her veiled threats. Within hours, murmurs spread like wildfire. Friends, colleagues, and extended family members began questioning everything they had once admired. Invitations to exclusive events were quietly rescinded, partnerships frozen, and whispers of lawsuits began circulating. At a charity gala, the stage where she had always shone, she stood surrounded by the elite, smiling as if nothing were wrong. I let the whispers reach her naturally. Did you hear about the donations she mismanaged? One guest murmured near her shoulder. Another added, I saw some documents. It looks like she favored her own investments over the cause. Her face remained composed for a moment, but I could see the fissures forming. Eyes darted toward her. Murmurs escalated, and for the first time in decades, she was unsure of her footing. I didn't confront her directly yet. No, that would be too obvious. Instead, I let the evidence speak for itself, circulating through social media, news outlets, and private channels alike. She had built a reputation on perfection, on grace, on untouchability. I was stripping it away piece by piece. By evening, invitations to future events had vanished, business partners demanded explanations, and a few of her most loyal allies began quietly distancing themselves. A legal notice arrived at her office by mail, an inquiry into financial mismanagement that had been long suppressed. And somewhere in the chaos, I allowed myself a smile. Amy was safe, and the matriarch who had once dictated cruelty as easily as breathing was now vulnerable, exposed, and scrambling. Power, I reminded myself, was never permanent. Not when built on fear and manipulation. I watched from a distance as she struggled to salvage her image, realizing that the world she had controlled so effortlessly was slipping through her fingers. The first rays of morning sunlight fell across Amy's small face as she stirred from sleep, her eyes bright and curious. I kissed her forehead gently, savoring the peace that had eluded us for so long. For the first time in years, I could breathe without fear, knowing her life was truly in my hands. We arrived at the hospital for her treatment, but this time, everything was different. Doctors, nurses, and specialists moved with confidence, guided by precise information I had provided. I had ensured the best medical team, fully briefed and prepared, with no interference from the Harrisons. Every precaution had been taken, every risk minimized. As Amy underwent her procedure, I received the news I had been waiting for. Ted's diagnosis was accurate, but thanks to the public exposure of the family's cruelty and negligence, the Harrisons had been forced to pay for his treatment. Their pride was shattered, their control over the narrative gone. When Ted recovered, he was no longer the golden boy insulated from consequences. He looked around at the adults in his life, the parents and relatives who had prioritized appearances over compassion, and finally understood the cost of their cruelty. Why did no one help Amy? He asked quietly one afternoon, eyes wide as he turned to his father. The room went silent. My father-in-law's face flushed, guilt and anger warring in his eyes. My mother-in-law, normally composed, could only fidget with her hands, her carefully constructed mask crumbling. Amy, small but strong, glanced up at me and smiled. She had no idea of the full extent of the chaos we had unleashed, but she didn't need to. She was alive, thriving, and shielded from the poison of her family. I stepped forward, calm and deliberate, because they didn't care. But now you see what happens when cruelty has a cost. Not just for them, for everyone around them. Ted's eyes met mine, wide and unsure. Even me? Especially you, I said softly. But I made sure no child was truly hurt. Justice targets the guilty, not the innocent. From that day forward, the balance had shifted. The Harrisons, once untouchable, were humbled. Ted learned the weight of truth, the consequences of neglect, and the limits of privilege. Amy, meanwhile, thrived in an environment built on love, protection, and vigilance, a sharp contrast to the world she had narrowly escaped. And as I watched my daughter grow stronger each day, a quiet satisfaction settled over me. My revenge was not chaotic or blind. It had been precise, surgical, and complete. No mercy had been shown to those who deserved it. Amy's triumph was living proof that justice, finally, had been served. Mark had always considered himself untouchable, a man who could watch cruelty unfold and remain comfortably neutral, confident that his family's power would shield him. But neutrality is a dangerous illusion when justice is swift and deliberate. It began quietly. Contacts in his professional network began receiving anonymous tips about his complicity in family decisions, the cold indifference he had shown toward Amy, and his willingness to let a child suffer for convenience. Emails, documents, and carefully timed messages spread faster than he could contain. Projects he had built over years were frozen or canceled. Investors questioned his judgment. Partners whispered, and board members hesitated. His reputation, once pristine, began to erode before his eyes. At home, the cracks appeared even faster. Friends and colleagues stopped returning calls. Invitations to social and business gatherings vanished. Even his father's empire, now destabilized, could no longer shield him. One evening, I met him in a neutral location, a quiet cafe where the hum of conversation would prevent anyone from recognizing our exchange. He walked in, pale and stiff, the arrogance that once defined him replaced by a flicker of fear. What have you done?" he asked, voice low and controlled, though his hands shook. I smiled, calm and unyielding. "What I should have done a long time ago. You had your chance to protect Amy, to do the right thing. You chose indifference." His eyes darted around, as if searching for an escape. It's business. Family, it's complicated. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "I understand that loyalty and love mean nothing to you if they inconvenience you. I understand that cruelty wrapped in silence is still cruelty. And I understand that I will not allow my daughter or anyone else to suffer for your apathy." He swallowed hard, realization dawning. The collapse around him was no accident. Every lost deal, every angry partner, every whispered rumor, my doing. I had orchestrated it all with precision, leaving no chance for him to recover. I can fix this," he stammered, desperation creeping in. "You cannot," I said simply. "You can apologize, grovel, even beg, but it won't change anything. You learn too, late the cost of your choices." He sank into his chair, defeated, as the weight of his failures pressed down. The man who once claimed power now faced the truth. He had lost not just his family's admiration, but his credibility, his influence, and the respect of those around him. As I stood to leave, I paused, glancing down at Amy, who had been quietly watching from my side. Mark's expression flicked toward her, a mix of fear and regret. He finally understood what it meant to lose someone truly innocent to his apathy. And I allowed myself the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served, precise and unrelenting. From my apartment window, I watched the Harrison estate, once the pinnacle of power and control, become a theater of chaos. The empire they had built on cruelty and appearances was crumbling, each member scrambling to salvage what little dignity remained. Every whisper, every scandal, every financial collapse had unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. Mark's career had collapsed under public scrutiny, his former allies abandoning him one by one. My father-in-law faced lawsuits and mounting debts, his authority stripped bare. My mother-in-law, once untouchable, had lost influence, friends, and the carefully cultivated image that had defined her life. The golden boy, Ted, was left to confront the consequences of a childhood cocooned in privilege, privilege that had blinded him to the suffering of others. And yet, through it all, Amy thrived. She laughed, played, and grew stronger with each passing day. I had ensured not just her survival, but her security. Legal guardianship, financial independence, and a life shielded from the poison of the Harrisons. All were carefully arranged, like pieces of a puzzle locked into place. We walked through the park one crisp morning, Amy skipping ahead with unrestrained joy. I followed, hands tucked into my coat pockets, a quiet smile playing on my lips. "Mommy, will they ever be nice?" Amy asked innocently, looking up at me with wide eyes. I bent down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Some people, they never learn. But that's okay. We don't need them. We have each other, and that's more than enough." Later, as I returned home, I checked the latest news alerts. The Harrison empire continued to collapse under its own weight: bankruptcies, betrayals, resignations. The family that had once dictated my life now scrambled helplessly in the aftermath of their own actions. And I, who had been powerless once, now watched from the heights of careful planning, untouchable. I sat on the couch, Amy curled up beside me, and allowed myself a deep, satisfying breath. Every move I had made had been precise. Every reaction had been anticipated. Every consequence had landed exactly where it was meant to. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. Not just from the Harrisons, not just from fear and grief, but free to build a life filled with love, security, and joy. Amy's laughter echoed through the apartment, a sound more precious than any victory, more enduring than any revenge. And as I looked out the window at the crumbling facade of their world, I whispered softly, almost to myself, "No mercy. Not this time." A smile curved on my lips. The last laugh was mine,